Today we begin with the theme at the center of modern and contemporary painting: obsession, pattern, and seriality. So when an artist repeats a mark again and again, it changes how we look. Repetition can feel calming, mechanical, overwhelming, or intensely personal. It can flatten the image so there is no main subject, or it can make the time labor to the real subject. For this week, our anchor artist is Yayoi Kusama. Kusama builds entire worlds from repetition, dots, nets, accumulation that appear to spread without end. As we move through the lecture, keep one idea in mind: repetition is never neutral. It shapes attention, creates a rhythm, and can transform a simple motif into a complete visual experience. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to do three things. The first one, identify repetition, pattern, and seriality in a painting. What represents, where it repeats, how the surface is organized. The second one, describe how meaning is built through a repeated unit, like a dot, a line, a grid square, a face, or a product image. Third, compare multiple approaches to repetition in modern and contemporary art. We'll do that by moving from Kusama to the four artists that we are considering them expansion artists, even though they're very important in their own right. So first, after Yayoi Kusama, is Bridget Riley, Andy Warhol, Agnes Martin, and Chuck Close. Each uses repetition, but the purposes differ in each case. So we have perception ideas, mass media tools, quiet attention, and constructed realism. Let's define our key terms. In this theme, obsession points to persistent repetition, often to sustain that the original subject becomes less important than the repeated act itself. What is pattern? Well, pattern is repetition organized across a surface. Seriality is repetition across multiple versions of units, one image repeated or one method repeated over time. Notice the related ideas on the slide: repetition, accumulation, monotony, multiplicity. This hint at how repetition can shift the mood. It can soothe, numb, intensify, and critique something. In the Warhol image is a preview of another meaning of seriality. Modern life is built from repetition of images and repeated products in every aspect of the life. Artists also use repetition to mirror, question, and reshape that reality. Why this theme matters? Well, repetition matters because it can function as a technique, a subject matter, or a cultural mirror. As technique, repetition is how the work is made. A gesture repeated 1,000 times, or an image reproduced in mass series. As subject matter, repetition can be what the work is about. The surface becomes the event itself. Well, as a cultural mirror, seriality links painting to industry, different routines, media, consumption, worlds where repetition is constant. And importantly, repetition can change perception. It can produce movement or stillness, speed, slowness, stability, overwhelming. Well, with Kusama's imagery examples, we signal how repetition can expand beyond painting into objects and environments. Not just the flat surface, it's the whole environment. So we have few terms we'll use today. Obsession is first one. Persistent focus expressed through a repeated thought or repeated making. The other one, pattern, a repeated visual unit organized across a surface. Motif, the specific repeated unit in a building block. Accumulation. Many repeated elements gather until they become a new form. And then we have the Latin term horror vacui, which is an impulse, an obsession to fill the space, a living space, a room, something like a building, with every single detail. People fear that. So all this, people fear empty spaces. That's what I mean. That's why you have all this repetitive, obsessive, sometimes accumulations of objects and motives. So this term help you move from I like it to or I don't like it to a clear description of what you see and how it functions. Students often blend these words, pattern versus motive. So let's separate them now. A motive is a repeatable unit, a dot, a loop, a square, a face, a can. A pattern is the system created when the motive is repeated across a surface. Pattern includes spacing, rhythm, direction, density, and regularity. So motif is the stamp, where pattern is the layout. So we are looking at the method, how to look today. We'll use a simple 4-step method for looking. What do you do first? Describe. Describe what repeats, what is geometric or organic, dense or sparse. Second thing, analyze. What does repetition do to your perception? Is it movement? Is it vibration? Calm? Disorientation? Third is the context. Does it feel handmade or mechanical? Are differences visible within the repetition? And four, interpret. What might repetition mean here? Is it order, compulsion, critique, meditation, saturation of things? So I'll model this process as we move through each artist we're going to be talking about. So you can use the same approach in quizzes and the discussions that you're going to be writing about. So here is the guiding question. Is repetition a way to lose yourself or a way to find yourself? Repetition can be hypnotic. It can absorb attention until time feels totally altered. But repetition can also be grounding, like practice, routine, stabilizing a structure. Many modern and contemporary artists hold both possibilities at once. Look at Kusama again. Repetition can comfort and unsettle, clarify and overwhelm. As we move through the artworks, we'll keep asking, what kind of experience is this repetition creating? Kusama is a major post-war and contemporary artist who turned repetition into a full artistic language. She is known for dots, nets, and accumulations, motifs that expand until they feel limitless. It's also commonly noted that Kusama used art making, especially repetitive marks and serial processes, as a way to manage her hallucinations and trauma, translating intense internal experiences into disciplined visual systems. Importantly, repetition in her work is both method and meaning. It is a system she applies across painting, sculpture, performance, and immersive installations. When we look at Kusama's work, we'll focus on how repetition shapes attention, scanning, immersions, the feeling that the surface continues beyond the surface of the canvas. This quote captures Kusama's core logic. A small pattern can expand until it covers an entire space, walls, bodies, even the universe. What matters is the concept of expansion through repetition. A motif is not just repeated, it becomes a field. Boundaries blur. Is an interior, an exterior, itself is the environment. Use this quote as a key of interpretation. When you see her nets, dots, or accumulations, you can connect the visual strategy to this idea. Repetition is a force that transforms scales and identities. Kusama is a Japanese artist with an international career. No doubt about that. A key moment in her was in her style and career was New York 1958, where she develops large infinity net paintings. She works across media. Repetition travels with her, from painted marks to sculptural objects to immersive environments. As context, her work is often linked to intense experiences of perception. Her art becomes a discipline in that way by translating those experiences into visual forms. As we move into the artworks, keep the focus on what you can support visually: motive, pattern, scale, and the effect of repetition and perception. Kusama's serial method can be summarized very simply. First, choose a motif, often a dot or a looping mark. Second, repeat edge to produce an all-over surface. Third, let scale and duration create a sense of infinity. What's the key point? Because a serial painting makes time visible. Thousands of marks imply sustained labor, and even when repetition is consistent, small differences appear, reminding us the work is handmade. So now we'll apply this method to a specific early net painting. This slide gives the basic facts: title, date, medium, and collection. The title, No F, hints at serious thinking, like a catalog entry inside an ongoing practice. The date places it early in her New York period, when she established the infinity net approach. Even before analysis, the scale matters. Large, all-over repetition engages the viewer's body. It's not just an image you glance at, it's a surface you enter with your eyes. Next we'll shift from facts to what the painting actually does. Describe what you see. A small, repeated looping mark that forms a net-like field. There is no central subject. The surface is the subject. Analyze the effect. Repetition encourages scanning. Your eyes move continuously, searching without a final destination. The context. This looks systematic, but is handmade. Tiny variations in the repeated marks are part of the work's presence. And then comes the interpretation. The motif suggests endlessness because it extends to the edges and implies continuation beyond the canvas. This is repetition as immersion, an all-over feel that can feel expansive, quiet, or intense depending on how the viewer is perceiving the artwork. This is a studio image that shows repetition at two different levels. Inside each painting, one mark repeats thousands of times. Across painting, the method repeats, canvas after canvas, each one extending the same logic. But this is also a helpful reminder that seriality can be a way of living inside the process. The studio becomes a site of sustained practice. When repetition is dense enough, the work can read as near monochrome, minimal in palette, but excessive in labor. Next, we'll look at 1961 Infinity Network to see how the field becomes even more immersive. This work pushes repetition toward a near monochrome field. The motif is a repeated stroke that can be resembling weaving. The experience is primarily one of scanning, with no focal point. Your eyes move across the surface and the painting rewards sustained looking. A key concept here is rule and result. The rule is simple: repeat the mark, maintain the density, fill the surface. The result is complex, is rhythm, is slight variations, and feeling of endless continuation. This is where our guiding question returns. The repetition can feel like an absorption into a field, or like focused attention held steady by the structure. Here repetition moves off the canvas into the object, any object. This work transforms a chair through repeated stuffed fabric forms. The key term is accumulation. Many repeated units gather until the original object becomes something new. This shift matters for the theme. Repetition is not limited to painting. It's transferable method. A familiar domestic object, like a chair, becomes unfamiliar through excess, too much. The chair's identity is altered by repetition itself. Next, we'll analyze how accumulation changes mood and meaning. So looking again at the accumulation pieces, right? Piece, which is a chair filled with biomorphic forms. It looks like a fungus, like a coral. It has in a way humor and fear too, like turning a very domestic object into something alien. But it also shows the compulsion, the number of soot elements in it. It's overwhelming. So let's summarize what we talked about it. Repetition can erase hierarchy. The surface becomes the subject, no center focal point. This is what happened with Kusama's work. In serial paintings, time becomes visible too. Repetition records the duration and the labor of whatever the artist spent in the studio. There are serial methods that make this time visible, and sometimes it's not necessarily attained easily or even acknowledged for this type of artwork. Pattern becomes immersive. Repetition can shift from order to overwhelm, turning the artwork into an environment for attention, basically. And we'll talk later about installation art and environments. These claims will carry forward as we compare 4 additional artists who each use these repetitions differently. Just a quick summary. So for the expansion artists, remember there is one that's the anchoring one, and therefore expansion artists. For different directions, sometimes they challenge the main one. We have Bridget Riley, we have Andy Warhol, Agnes Martin, and Chuck Close. So in this regard, let's talk about it. Bridget Riley uses repetition to activate perception. We're going to look at the visuals in a second. Patterns that seem to move. It's op art. Andy Warhol uses repetition to mirror mass media, products, celebrities, all those repeated commodities. Agnes Martin uses repetition as a quiet structure, grids that support slow attention. And then we have Chuck Close, who uses repetition as a method for portraits. It's a build grid, it's cell by cell. Bridget Riley. She's a British artist, born 1931. It's closely associated with the op art, where repetition produces optical effects. Her paintings often feel active. Your eyes work to stabilize what you see. The effort of the eyes become the experience itself. Sometimes I get dizzy, right? Riley connects to our theme because she turns pattern into sensation. She also connects to Kusama through all-over structure, but the intention differs. Kusama often builds immersion and infinity. Riley builds optical vibrations and instability. As you look at Riley, shift your question from what is of to what does it do to my perception? My eyes, The viewer's visual experience is the central part of the artwork. How would you describe Bridget Riley's movement in squares? It's repeated squares arranged in a grid. The system appears orderly, but the squares compress and distort across the surface. The grid is bending inward, creating an illusion of movement and depth. Nothing physically moves, but the movement occurs through your perception. The precision matters because it intensifies that optical effect. The painting can feel engineered, even when handmade. So repetition produces instability. Order becomes a sensation. The work shows the serial pattern can be dynamic, not static. You can turn a simple unit into an embodied visual event. Bridget Riley Cataract number 3, 1967. The motif shifts from squares to curved bends. The repetition is still systematic, but the experience changes. The flowing stripes or waves repeat across the canvas. The repeated bends can create a pulsing vibration, shifting depth on the surface. The surface seems to shimmer. Riley demonstrates that repetition can generate motion, like experience through pattern. Compared with Kusama, the emphasis is less on infinity as a field, but more on how repetition triggers the eyes to constantly adjust to this movement. Next, we will pivot from optical sensation to the mass media repetition of Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol, 1928, 1987. That's the sad story of his life. But Andy Warhol is a K-pop artist who uses the visual language of advertising and media. In his work, Seriality mirrors a world saturated with repeated images. Warhol's type of repetition can read as critique, but also celebration, or both. Repeating a product or a celebrity face can make it feel ordinary through saturation, yet also very monumental by insisting it belongs on a canvas. As we look at Andy Warhol work, notice how repeated images can be identical in format, but still vary in small ways, like shifts in color, fading, misalignments. Those differences matter because they show how repetition generates meaning rather than eliminating it. Let's look at Andy Warhol's Campbell's soup cans, very famous ones. Soup cans repeat across multiple panels, right? The motif is the can. The pattern is the serial arrangement of it. It's resembling a shelf display in the HEB if you want. So, repetition makes the image familiar but impersonal, also strangely insistent. You are asked as a viewer to look at the product as an art subject. Warhol approach is tied to the mechanical reproduction and commercial design. Even when handmade elements exist, the look aims towards printed culture. The seriality collapses with the boundaries between art and consumer life. Warhol suggests that modern imagery is always a system of repetition, and the painting can reflect that system directly. A true visionary in the art world. So let's talk about Andy Warhol's Marlene Dietrich's panels, 1962, silkscreen, ink, acrylic paint on canvas. So Marlene's face repeats across two panels. One side is very vivid in colors, the other one is in black and white and fading. The repetition turns the face of an icon in the movie industry, and the difference between panels introduces themes of presence and disappearance, glamour, erosions. Everything fades away. As context, the silkscreen paintings connect the image to mass media and allows imperfections, uneven ink, misregistration, and fading that becomes expressive. Repetition can drain individuality into a repeated image. The work stages how media reproduces a person until the face becomes surface, recognizable everywhere but detached from the person behind. And with that, we move to the next one, and we'll move to a more quieter type of artwork by Agnes Martin. Agnes Martin is often associated with minimalism, but her work is deeply personal in tone. She uses repetition, especially the grid, to create the type of quiet structure. Agnes Martin connects to our theme because repetition can produce calm rather than intensity. She also connects with Kusama through all over surfaces, but with a different emotional aim. Where Kusama can feel expansive and immersive, Martin can feel restrained, steady, contemplative. When looking at Martin's work, the key is subtlety. There are faint lines, gentle variation, the way a surface responds to light. Repetition becomes a support for attention rather than a spectacle. So when we look at Agnes Martin artwork called Friendship, which is gold leaf on oil on canvas, a delicate grid structure across the surface with gold leaf that changes with light. The repetition here slows the viewer down. The grid rhythm is steady and shifts and subtle. The grid is handmade, so minute irregularities matter. The work balances structure and human presence. Martin's abstract titles often suggest states of mind rather than depicting objects. Friendship, the title of the painting, can be read as a steadiness and support, repetition as a quiet container for feelings. This shows one more possibility in our theme, repetition as a calm attention. For the next slides, we will move to chalk close, where repetition becomes a method for building the image. So we'll continue to talk about chalk close. Chalk close is known for very large portraits that sometimes they take a few miles away to be understood or seen. He is building on a systematic process of the grid. His connection to our theme is the repetition becomes basically the method, which a face is constructed over time from different little squares and different values in them. Close shares with Kusama the use of repetitive units, but his goals are different. Instead of dissolving the subject into a field, he constructs the subject from repetitive parts. When viewing close, distance matter, like I mentioned, from miles away, from few blocks away, it's better. From far away, you see a realistic portrait. Up close, you see pattern repetition. Cells, marks, micro decisions. The grid becomes a tool that turns the painting into a serial process. Chuck Close Lucas 1. From a distance, the portrait reads as a face. Up close, you can see the repeated structure. The image is built cell by cell within a grid. Each cell contains mark that may not look like skin on their own first, but collectively they resolve and they merge into realism. The repetition of the pattern is very procedural. The repeated act is translation, one square at a time. Time becomes visible because you can imagine the sustained effort required. Chuck Close shows repetition as construction rather than erasure. Serial method produces a recognizable human subject, built from repeated parts that only fully make sense as a whole when you step away from it. As a summary to what we have discussed so far, so we have 5 approaches, and these are expressed to the artist we are looking at. Yayoi Kusama has an obsessive accumulation type of art, infinity fields if you wish. Bridget Riley, it's optical vibrations, perceptual movement, very hard on the eyes. Andy Warhol has a vision about mass production earlier than it happened in our society. So it's about media circulation. Agnes Martin, she has very, very quiet, delicate lines that create this grid. So it's very subtle and sustained to our attention without being. Another summary on the vocabulary words. We are looking at few concepts right here. So Know the vocabulary. That's very important because we're working with terminology that defines art world. Obsession, pattern, motive, accumulation, haravakwi. Know the core claims. Repetition can erase hierarchy. Serial methods make time visible. Pattern can become immersive and reshape attention. A strong way to study is that to take one artwork and explain it using three vocabulary terms, plus one theme that claims that. Support the specifics of the visual evidence. That practice prepare you for both quiz and discussion responses. Here are Kusama anchors to remember. She develops major series including Infinity Nets, Accumulation Works, and later becomes widely known for immersive environments. Her practice centers on repetitive motifs, dots, nets, marks, expanded until they feel limitless. A key concept associated with her work is self-obliteration. The self dissolves into the repetition and the large scale of her work. When writing about Kusama, connect concept to what you can point to. The all-over surface, the repeated unit, the density, the way work implies continuation beyond the canvas. Very difficult on our eyes. And then for the last one, Chuck Close is a method. He is a realist constructed in repeated processes. So for the final slide, and we're talking about the references, this is the final slide list sources for images and artwork information. In art history, reliable documentation matters. We look at titles, data, dates, media, and collections that establish a factual foundation. As you work through the course, use this model. Start with trusted museum and collection resources. Then build your visual vocabulary analysis on top of accurate object information. That concludes theme number 1. So we finished talking about obsession, pattern, and seriality. In the next themes, we'll keep using the same looking methods, describe, analyze, contextualize, interpret, to build confidence with modern and contemporary art.